interested, I'll try to promote people. I know some have declined, and that's totally fine as well.
Okay. Well, good afternoon to everyone out there. I'm Jody Duva. I'm the Vice President for Cox Business and also the 2023 Chair for the OCBC Board. So thanks to those of you who are joining us today for this meeting on SERF, which I'm sure everyone knows, but I'll just use it so that we all get used to it. Stands for Community Economic Resilience Fund. And SERF was meant for Orange County to build a more equitable and environmentally sustainable economy by supporting new plans and strategies to help us to diversify our local economy and also to develop sustainable industries that create good and broadly accessible, high-paying jobs. So this, of course, cannot be done without the business community. And that is why the private sector is a critical partner to helping us to execute SERF well. So with that, thanks everyone for joining us, and I will pass it over to Jesse Benron to talk a little more about SERF and what's next for us. So Jesse, take it away.
Thanks, Jody. And I'll say, so if people want to kind of just introduce themselves in the chat, we should be able to, everyone should be able to kind of chat with everybody. So that would be very helpful. So I know for some of you, I'll go to share screen now. I think for some of you, you probably have known SERF like a little bit or fairly well. Let me go ahead and kind of change view here. But again, the primary purpose of this is for those who aren't incredibly familiar with SERF, what this is all about. And we'll have kind of multiple convenings of this as we get to the more substance and stuff of what SERF will accomplish. And so I'll go ahead and discuss what those are, but very briefly, or not very briefly, but we want to be able to make sure that people are aware of what SERF is. It's a very new thing. It's very broad and in many ways complicated. And so we wanted to make sure that a lot wasn't dumped on you, but things were brought to you kind of in a digestible manner. So again, we're talking about SERF here. But, what is SERF? And this is directly from the grant, right? The purpose of SERF. The purpose of SERF funding is to build an equitable, sustainable economy across California's diverse regions and foster long-term economic resilience in the overall transition to a carbon neutral economy. I kind of put in other words, there are very major themes here when it comes to SERF that will be brought up time and time again, but it's important to kind of drill now. But there's about economic resilience. This SERF kind of came out of the COVID pandemic. Some time has kind of elapsed, but primarily, when they talk about resilience, they mean, there are industry sectors, there are jobs that tend to do better kind of regardless of the economic environment. So again, resiliency is really important, like kind of these quality jobs that despite what's happening, external factors, these jobs can remain, people can still stay employed, or these industries can still continue to go forward. Sustainable, the state of California, probably more than any other state, has very strong climate goals. And so sustainability is, yes, we want economic development, but we're not going to kind of destroy the planet as we do that. Equitable, for those of you, I'm sure we all know that the Orange County economy has a lot of inequity. And so not only are we doing economic growth, but for those who may not have had the same access to prior success economically. And then global competitiveness, which kind of just means like these industries kind of have to make sense for Orange County. I bring this up, 60 years ago, ag probably was an industry that we probably invest heavy if SERF was such a thing back then. Now, not so much, right? We have medical devices, we have healthcare, we have hospitality, cybersecurity. We have a long list of strong industry clusters. So it has to just kind of make sense for the Orange County economy as well. And so kind of this is a map here, but just so you can see that little pullout, if you look at this big map, right, Orange County, the whole point is that Orange County is its own region. The state, the state kind of divvied itself up into 13 regions. Luckily for Orange County, we're one of the few, along with I think LA, as really the only, and Kern as really like the only counties that got to be its own region. As you can see, our neighbors to the east, both counties are together. Our neighbors to the south, both counties are pushed together. So I think this is a real opportunity for kind of Orange County, again, for Orange County stakeholders to really make decisions for Orange County. Although I will say, it doesn't hurt to have conversations with your peers in certain regions, particularly those that are adjacent to us, because our economies are so intertwined. So I think there's a beauty to this because it's about Orange County stakeholders. However, let's acknowledge that certain jobs or certain even people live in one region, work in the other. So let's recognize that some of the conversation should be had with other regions as well. So what is kind of SURF? SURF is a $5 million kind of economic development planning grant. This is phase one. Again, I want to emphasize this is a planning grant, and I'll talk about a little bit for implementation, but we haven't had much details from the state of what that would look like. So again, we are in the process of just planning this economic development plan, coming up with strategies, and then we'll go to projects, which is probably where most people's heads are at when they think grant opportunities. Usually when you write a grant, it's already projects in mind and project implementation. Right now, we're only talking about developing a plan. And so what are the major outcomes of this plan? When we deliver this to the state, they want to see three things primarily. They want to see that a High Road Transition Collaborative, or HRTC, has been developed. They would like a regional economic plan developed. For those of you who might know, because this is the business community, we have something called a comprehensive economic development strategy. This economic plan is probably closely related to that. However, I go back to some of those pillars or values that I mentioned prior, where I don't think previous reports have had to really drill down on those aspects. And then lastly, is the kind of deciding on strategic investments and projects. And I'll go into more of what these are. But at the end of the day, yes, planning is great. Planning is important, especially with all these different stakeholders. But I think like all of us, we want to see projects getting done, that it isn't just a planning exercise. So ultimately, we will as a region decide what are the strategic investments and projects that'll help us achieve this regional economic plan that we come up with. So the HRTC, is essentially an executive committee, I think, if we want to use those terms. And so here are all the different broad stakeholders that have to participate in this. Again, I think most of these stakeholder groups probably talk amongst themselves. Maybe they talk to a few, but not truly to this kind of breadth. And so that's what's really important, that we're going to go far by going together. And so again, business like you as stakeholders, but we're going to be talking to labor organizations and economic development agencies and philanthropic groups for there to be some kind of collective decision making. And then this is what the HRTC has been, tasked with. Again, guidance and recommendation to the regional plan. And again, I'll talk more into detail what's in these regional plans. Ultimately need to approve this regional plan to the state, or they will, the HRTC, I mean. And then they will, the HRTC also needs to identify other planning processes and projects to align with SURF. I'm sure that many of you have things that are going on that would be helpful in the context of SURF. I'm sure even just by the definition I gave you, you could all say, oh, we're working on this, and this would aid greater economic equity, greater environmental sustainability with economic growth and whatnot. So of course, SURF should not just be this own separate thing. The point of the HRTC primarily being Orange County participants is they'll be able to understand, well, I'm working on this, so let's see how I can get what I'm working on into SURF, or how SURF can align with what I'm working on. And then I think ultimately, which is the most important thing, is what are those initiatives and projects for phase two? So the HRTC kind of has been formed, and I'll talk about more of kind of your role kind of as the business stakeholder group in subsequent slides. So the regional plan part one, right? What needs to be in it? I think it's you see it like the pillars are there, right? Equity, sustainability. Again, we want good paying jobs. We want access to those good paying jobs. So it's not just, yeah, that's fine, a job pays 6 figures, but you need a master's degree, right? How accessible is that to people? And then back to economic competitiveness, the industries or the jobs need to make sense for Orange County, and resilience, right? We want those quality jobs, despite whether there's a recession or not, or a pandemic again or not, many of these jobs can kind of stay intact. So what needs to be in the regional plan part one? A regional summary, so a snapshot of the Orange County economy, but also stuff like public health. Again, back to how this was tied to COVID at one point, and kind of environmental inequity. So there needs to be kind of an environmental analysis and the interplay between these things. Stakeholder mapping, and I'll share this slide that gets hyperlinked, but I'm probably just going to go over the website where a lot of these things are listed after I kind of present here. A stakeholder map, I think I've sent it all to you. It's really important to know who's doing what in Orange County. I think many times we're in meetings where someone says something and you say, I didn't know you were doing that. We could totally partner and collaborate, and we can maximize impact. So the whole point of the map is to notify the HRTC. So again, I hope a lot of you fill that out so the HRTC is aware of the great work you're doing in the community. But this will also be a public facing document, so people of the public can see, oh, this is what this organization is doing. I might want to connect with them to see how we can partner. And then I think more typical economic reporting, right? Labor market analysis, what's the employment rate, how many jobs are in what sector versus another. Industry cluster analysis, very much the same thing. Where are our largest industry clusters? Where are more concentrated industry clusters? So industry cluster may not be the largest, but it's so unique to Orange County, right? That's kind of what an industry cluster does. And a basically, strength, weakness, opportunity, threats, kind of a SWOT analysis. And then once we kind of develop, so let me go back, what I would just call it more of the data phase, right? What most people think of a typical economic, or at least economic research, then you move into, well, like what's the vision? What are the strategies given the data set? And then the HRTC will then be deciding what are the strategies for growth of targeted industries, how to increase economic diversification, how do we respond to economic shocks better, how do we increase economic equity, how do we increase equity when it comes to health and environmental, all right? Because there are some people who live even in Orange County, even though it's just one county, live in cleaner environments than others. And the state wants to see that we are not, cutting against the current. And so what are the state strategies around environmental equity or increasing, having better public health outcomes, or how the state is looking to increase, quality jobs? These are all things that the Orange County group needs to be in consideration of. So the state does want kind of all the regions coming together on things that, again, do not contradict what the state wants to do. And the key point, because I talk about equity, is there are definitions of disinvested communities. And here are the definitions. I'm going to show you a map, again, once I kind of go through the deck to make it easier as we go through the slides to show you exactly where. I think it's really important. I think that, and as I go through it, there are, I think for people, because we know Orange County, there are more disinvested communities than people would like to think. I think people on this call who know Orange County know that those exist, but maybe outside of Orange County, there is kind of a perception that everything is kind of coastal and wealthy and everything is great here, but let's acknowledge that that's not true. And so we have a map and maps, and you can kind of dig in even by census tract. You could probably zoom in to the neighborhood you live in to see if it's a disinvested community or friends or families or neighbors. So we'll show you that, and you can kind of review on your own time, but it makes it easier than like, well, what does this mean? What is a census tract with median household income at or below 80% of the statewide median income? That's a lot to kind of digest. So we just kind of have a visual representation of that. But disinvested communities are at the core, that if we want as a region to have the maximum dollars amount invested into Orange County from the SURF grant, that disinvested communities need to benefit from this. And so again, that's why the maps are really important, understanding census tracts, so we can say, the businesses are located in the census tracts or the residents live in census tracts. So this is where maybe if you look at the maps and, maybe your community isn't there, that doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't participate in this, because we have a very mobile population, and that maybe someone could be a business owner but lives in a disinvested communities tract, or one of the employees of the businesses we could be supporting through SURF live in a disinvested communities tract. So we have to kind of be aware that it's not just necessarily physically located, but that it helps the residents of disinvested communities. And we can kind of work through that as we continue along this process. I kind of alluded to it, but I don't like to talk too much about it because there's not many details, but let's acknowledge that this is where, something significant can happen. Again, $450 million, the 13 regions now will have to compete. It's not now, but in a couple months, or actually closer to a year, we'll compete for this pot of money. But that's where once we do the data, once we come up with the strategies, then we submit projects to the state for funding. And then, as you can see, given that dollar amount, a significant amount of funding in order to execute some of these things. And so we have these plans, or we're going to eventually agree on these investments and projects. But much as I said, right, there are kind of values or tenets to these things, and that is the projects have to align with the strategies of the HRTC, and those values need to demonstrate equity, promote state climate goals. They need to have strong job quality, and if possible, there needs to be complementary funding. So it's not as if like SURF is to fund all this. That's why the philanthropic sector is an important stakeholder. Maybe there are other grants that can get kind of woven in, and that the state wants to see kind of other sources of funding as well. That'll have a stronger proposal, and stronger proposals kind of receive more funds. So I've you're part of the stakeholder meeting, and some of your colleagues are as well. They've all been invited. I think there's probably more outreach that needs to be done, but kind of the list of all the local chambers, the list of all the ethnic chambers and other kind of business associations. But the point of the stakeholder meeting, all of you, is that yes, the HRTC exists, but we want broader stakeholder input. And so, providing input makes the HRTC have better decisions. And so just because you're not on the HRTC does not mean that your input is very credible. And we as the business community need to have, maybe not a unified voice, but we need to understand kind of what are the things that we believe are best. And then those get compared to all the different stakeholder groups. So absolutely, your feedback will be critical throughout the entire process. Again, support the landscape analysis. It'd be great to have your organization kind of listed on there so the HRTC and the public is aware of exactly what you do for the community as it pertains to SURF. This is just the first one, right? This is just us notifying you what SURF is, but we want to have subsequent meetings with, once the data is near complete, we'd like, all of you to look at it and say, yeah, this makes sense with what I'm seeing given my position, or this contradicts exactly what I'm seeing, or this is great, but there's not enough about this item or that item. And so it's almost like bringing up the document for public input. When we do the data phase, we'll have a call where we'd like you to provide that input, to review and provide input. And then when we have the strategies conversation, we'd like you to provide input and say, well, that's not really how I see how we can have economic equity with environmental sustainability. And I have stakeholders through my constituencies, and this is how they're getting it done. Can we consider including that as well? Then, when we get to the projects phase, we want to use this group as the vehicle to say, hey, are there any great projects you're working on or thought about working on? And in order to solicit projects from this sector, and then maybe, although it's still undecided, maybe this group will decide what comes of at least the business or the employer stakeholder group, and then all the subsequent sectors kind of make their own decisions as well as far as what are priority projects. Again, that's possibly, that isn't finalized, but that is the possibility. So again, we probably will have another meeting just around Regional Plan Part 1 for feedback, another meeting around Regional Plan Part 2, and then again, use this call to be, hey, here's the state's SFP, here are the visions and the strategies that you all took a look at when it came to Part 2. So what are the projects that are the strongest for us to send to the state for a significant amount of funding? So I think that's the point of these stakeholder groups. The HRTC is cross-sectoral, which is of course the intent. However, there needs to be kind of a deeper understanding of what each sector wants to do. And that's the point of these calls and kind of why your input would be very critical and important. So we kind of had a meeting, right, April or May. When the time comes, we'll obviously give you, much more notice because the timelines, I think, are becoming more finalized. But we'd like to kind of bring the data to you before it gets finalized, sometime in June, maybe July. Then we want to come back in October once we are discussing strategies to get your input on strategies. And then back in November, again, like the SFP from the state as far as project implementation. The Regional Plan Part 2 is complete. So please, start writing grants, start communicating, start collaborating. And then, as I said, if we go down that route, there could be potentially a meeting in February for investment recommendations. And so with that, I'm just going to jump over to the web page because I think that'll kind of illuminate a lot as well. So I will drop this kind of in the chat and send it to you kind of via email after. But again, here's kind of the page, and it kind of discusses SURF. I would say that, and as you kind of scroll down, you'll see right here, the proposal is like something like 70 pages. So our job is to try to condense that down because I don't want you to spend 2 or 3 hours just trying to understand what SURF is. We have a little bit of summaries, but I'll tell you we're going to try to make it even more concise right there. If you want kind of general updates, you can kind of subscribe directly to it and we can kind of update you on all these things. And here's kind of the High Road Transition Collaborative, right? So here are some of your peers representing you as far as what the HRTC will decide. We have members of the business community. If we click through, we have members of the California Native Tribe community. We can go to kind of education and training providers, right? Some of our foremost institutions, grassroots and community-based organizations. They're a critical partner in deciding what the community needs. Here are some of those, so you can kind of click through at your leisure. If you go on the website, it'll tell you when the next HRTC meeting is. It's open to the public. So much like this, you can kind of call in and see the research for yourself, provide comments, ask questions directly for yourself if you'd like, and a calendar of events and when those meetings are. Stakeholder mapping, as I said, you could take the survey now. It'd be great to understand kind of your role in developing a high road economy, and that means achieving economic growth, economic equity, and shared prosperity. We'll put this calendar up, but this is kind of one of the stakeholder group meetings, but the community-based organizations are having their own, labor is having their own, philanthropy is having their own. So we'll get a calendar of events up in case you feel like you serve multiple stakeholder groups, you're not tied to just one. So by all means, you can join those as well if you're interested. And then we have outreach and engagement. So one will be a survey, which you could take now. I would think it might help to wait a little bit more before you see kind of more data. But some of those questions about how do we create a more equitable economy? How do we create a more sustainable economy while doing so? Those are all kind of in the survey. But one thing that's also really important as well is that there is an RFP for outreach and engagement. So please take a look at that. And again, I'll drop that in the chat or send an email, but there is then funding if you apply for this to try to do outreach. It could be to disinvested communities, but we also need to, again, understand the perspective of the business community. So to see like, well, how do we grow a certain industry sector, or how do we get employers to get people trained so that they can then, earn a higher income, and what are those jobs that are being hired, and what are those jobs, and what are the skill sets that they need. So that's a possibility I think people should consider. If you're a local chamber, you have those communities, you can survey or do some sort of focus groups with your members to really understand what the needs are of the business community, and then connect that to what we're hearing from other stakeholder groups as well. And I think this is like really the most important, or not the most important, but here's the map that I discussed, and I think just give it some time to load. One moment. Sorry, thank you. And then here you go. So if you look, let me just kind of zoom in here. And again, please feel free to kind of toggle around and play with this yourself. But here's kind of a map of all the census tracts here in Orange County, and there's even city lines. So for those of you who are, again, kind of based on your jurisdiction, but if you look in here, these kind of the dotted lines show you kind of where Fullerton is, where Tustin is, and whatnot. But this is just, so far, this is just kind of based on ethnicity, where our kind of Latinx population resides, is in the yellow. The darker the color, the more maybe intense, right, or maybe more homogenous the region is. And then kind of the red is probably where our Asian population. But if you kind of go, there's given the different criteria, right here are the census tracts where the median household income for a family of four is less than $95,000. That's considered low income by the state standard. And so here, as you can see, all the different color. And again, the more intense the color, then I think the lower the kind of the income level. But as you can see, right, it spreads from north to south. Right, there are disinvested communities in South County, and North County and Central Orange County as well. So this is to get a sense. Again, you can kind of zoom in. If you look over here, you can kind of even search by address, but you can kind of really zoom in and play around. And then another criteria is going to be added in blue. So this is the state's definition from Cal EPA. So again, if your census tract, if you see that blue, that's a disinvested community. And what we have done, although we're not limited to it, is we have hyper-focused on the census tracts that have all that overlap. And that's then primarily kind of in this region right here. And just because you're not in the kind of red highlighted, it does not mean, obviously your census tracts kind of qualify, your areas qualify. But as I mentioned before, depending on the amount of people you have kind of working for a company, say in your community, they don't necessarily have to be located in the disinvested communities. Maybe the residents are, and you're a job center. And so that's really important too. So it's just understanding that the residents of disinvested communities are the ones that kind of benefit most from these decisions. So I just encourage you to play around to get a sense of kind of where the residents or where these projects kind of need to be in order to maximize income from the state. And then there's some other supplemental documents. There's an executive summary. Please, the planning phase plan, I think, really lays out what we're trying to do here. It's like about 15 pages. We are just getting it and translated into Spanish and Vietnamese as well to be respectful of the people's communities. And then here are updates. We've had a few HRTC meetings. You could see the agenda. You could see the meeting notes and a recording in case you're unavailable. And as they come online, these stakeholder meetings. So after this call, you'll see one under Employer and Business Association. I know for a fact the philanthropic organizations already had one. So here's their information in case you wanted to kind of review. And so with that, again, I highly encourage you, and I can kind of just drop it in the chat right now, if you could kind of review that website. But of course, I'm here to answer any questions as well, both not only on this call, but after, in case you kind of want to learn more about surf and to get engaged. And I think with that, I think if there are any questions, if people could kind of use the Q&A, or you should be a way to kind of signal, and then I can kind of allow you to talk as well. So Q&A chat, by all means, I'm happy to kind of answer any questions and elaborate more. Actually, and but before I do, Anna, could you introduce yourself since you are a fellow HRTC member as Jody has?
Yes, of course. Good afternoon. I won't be able to stay for the remainder of the meeting, but my name's Ana Ursua. I'm also on the HRTC. I mentioned I work with a business incubator. We're also a network of cooperative businesses in Orange County that's growing. So it's a pleasure to meet you. And I look forward to more people, connecting and hope to spread the word. And I'm glad folks are joining today.
Yeah, thanks. And this is like the first, right? Because I think, and I'm sure you know businesses directly, and I think Laura, right? Right, you have your business correctly. That'll be more than maybe just the organizations, but we can kind of work on even the businesses directly themselves, right? As Jody is representing a business specifically. So this is just the first one. We want to try to get the grass top, so to speak, more familiar with this, and then we can start diving down to get individual businesses input as well. Yeah, so Laura, that's a great restating the timeline for the state. So by the end of August, we need to have that regional plan kind of part one, which is the data set part. And then by the end of June, June of 2024 is when we have to have the strategies done and the projects done. So we hope to maybe even try to finish a little bit earlier if we can in Orange County, but those are absolute deadlines given to the state or from the state. So again, really at the end of it all, we're looking at kind of June of 2024. That's a great question. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, there is not an answer yet, Laura. Again, the SFP from the state is where we don't quite know yet. There was a pilot project done like several months ago that there is an RFP for that, and I can in the follow-up, I'll go ahead and send that information as well. That might give us some insight as far as like what the state is looking for when it comes to projects even broadly, let alone from a globally competitive standpoint. But we don't know who the winners are, which I think is probably more telling. Is like once you can see who the winners are of the pilot project, it'll probably tell you more about what projects the state wants to see. So unfortunately, that's why I didn't kind of spend too much time on that. Once the state releases it, I'm sure, again, we'll have a call specifically about here's the state's SFP. What are people's thoughts about it? How can we organize around this SFP? But right now, it's unavailable, so I couldn't speak to more than it's happening. But other than that, I can't provide more. Any others? Again, you could use the chat, or I'm happy to, I think there's a way to signify, I can kind of just take you off, or you can become a panelist and you can also chime in. Okay. Well, then last call, and I think we can kind of save ourselves 30 minutes here. And I'll send everything in a recap, but we just hope that you kind of stay engaged. Please look at the website. And we'd like, again, your input and feedback. Again, I know this is me kind of more talking at you, but in subsequent meetings, again, once we kind of have a draft of the proposal, it's very much more where Jody will step in and facilitate. And we also have another organization, California Forward, supporting on you providing more input, you doing more of the speaking. Your input and perspective is important. And that's where like I take a step back and just kind of take notes. And then we try to improve the document before we submit it to the state. So one last call, and if not, I'll hand it over to Jody to adjourn. Any other questions? If you want to raise your hand, again, I can allow you to talk if you'd like. If not, I think we'll end it. Okay, hearing none. I think Jody, I think we can adjourn the meeting.
Sure. So thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully you'll review the material and have lots of questions for Jesse. Keep him busy and help us all learn. And we'll all learn as we go. We're looking forward to obviously bringing ideas and projects forward. So we thank you all for your time, and we will see you on the next call.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.